I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Thank you for supporting and joining and following the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun doing interviews with people that I know and that I respect. And I learn a lot. So I'm hoping that what I'm learning and discovering in my conversations is of value to you as well. What do I want you to do? I want you to keep checking us out, tune in and comment. Give us some feedback. Be part of the community that we are serving and building. In fact, what I have tried to do in my career as a journalist and as a publisher and now as a social media person is see my work as building the information infrastructure for our people. We do great work in every realm, in every activity, from governance to education to arts and culture to health to business and beyond. What we don't do enough of is telling our story to ourselves and telling our story to the world. And narrative, we know, is important. Narrative is the historical record, reflects the histories that we have written, and they also guide us in the creation of stories in the future. What kind of stories? Stories that present us as the winner. What do you mean, Al McFarlane? What do you mean, us as the winner? Well, I may mean that our concept of winning may be different from somebody else's. And we may be operating with a concept that winning doesn't mean there has to be a loser. We can operate in a frame of mind that says that every human being, every living thing has value and has a place and has a role to play. And if we simply can recognize the interconnectedness of all, we become our best selves. Well, today's program is with a couple of people that I think exemplify the ability to intuit, to describe, to reflect, to reveal the eternal essence of our existence. They do it as artists, as singers, as pianists, and they do it as part of a production coming up in a few days, this weekend, as a matter of fact, that I want you to learn about. The project this weekend celebrates Rondo community called Rondo 56. I'm pleased to have Dan Chouinard here and T. Mychael Rambo to talk about this activity. Brothers, gentlemen, good to see you. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I got some notes that I'll be reading over the course of the conversation, but let's start just by talking and welcoming you. And you know what I told you before we went on live is that my role here is to listen and to encourage you guys to talk about whatever's on your heart, what's in your mind, what you feel. And I'll ask questions that take you deep and that you'll enjoy. So, Brother T. Mychael, Brother Dan, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Very good to see you as always, my friend. And I have to tell you that being in the seat that I'm in, while it's not directly across from you, it's always nice to see your face and to know that what comes with that smile is an infinite graciousness and an appreciation for our community and the people who live in it and what we need to learn and gain to be able to move forward. So I appreciate what you do, sir.
Well, let's jump with, first of all, what's on your mind? When you woke up this morning, what'd you think about? What'd you think about today when you got up?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you would ask me, T. Mychael of the Rambo, what did I think about when I got up this morning? I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on spirit. You know, I have an affinity for waking up with a morning practice of prayer and meditation. I have something called neuropathy, so I have to wake my feet up before the rest of my body can get up. So I do spend some time doing some of that. Then when I think about what was on my mind, I am in the midst of a project that this show is not about, but I'm working with a very phenomenal author named Resma Minikin, who has written several books, and he's a community kind of culture bearer of a sort. No, not of a sort, he is. And he has a wealth of knowledge. He's written a New York Times bestselling book called My Grandmother's Hands. And Resma and I co-authored and have collaborated to write a children's book that is released on the 20th of this month It's called Stories from My Grandmother's Hands. So this morning, I actually woke up thinking about getting some of the travel associated with the press junket we'll be doing around the country, because Resma has a brand new book. And so we'll be presenting both books at the same time. So that's been on my mind. But my preparation and my heart is all about Sunday, the 8th at 4 o'clock at Crooners.
Okay, Dan, let me start with you then. Go to you and talk about the same question. What's on your mind? When you woke up this morning, what were you thinking, feeling? What dreams were you reflecting on? And what kind of goals that you have as you set your day?
Well, let's see. I won't focus on the dream that was that I just came out of when I woke up this morning, which was something about a failed performance of some sort or another. But that's neither here nor there. I feel whenever I get a chance to do this project, this show called Rondo 56, remembering St. Paul's Black Main Street, I'm reminded of how grateful I am that I get to, first of all, spend time with this group of people: T. Michael Rambo, Thomasina Petrus, Charmin Michelle, Gerald Boudreau, and a few other guys in the band, and that I get time to spend with this story of a community that had such strength and such a bond and such creativity in the face of dire challenges in the 1940s and 1950s, and to have the luxury of having read about that and researched and learned stories and talked with some Rondo elders 10, 12, 13 years ago when we first started doing this show. There's just a lot to be grateful for, totally aside from the joy of doing this show and playing this music that comes from the post-war years, from the 40s and the 50s, and the stories that are woven in with all of that T. Michael and the others helped to tell so beautifully. So I feel really lucky. It's a busy time because there's a lot to do to kind of get it back up on its feet after what I think about 18 months was the last time we did the full version of this show.
Mm-hmm. Well, so listen, let me talk about the show from the press materials that were delivered to me, and this Sunday is going to be a special night of storytelling and history and music combining on stage to revisit the fate of St. Paul's now legendary Rondo neighborhood around 1956. And it's a saga in Twin Cities history that's complete with compelling mid-century Black music and gospel, R&B, and jazz that takes place at Crooner's main stage Sunday, September 8th. And it stars some of the area's most celebrated actors and singers, including T. Michael Rambo and Charmin Michelle and Dan Chenard, Thomasina Petrus, and more. This is a rare and stirring portrait of another era that uses music, stories, and archival photos of St. Paul's thriving Black neighborhood in the 40s and 50s before it was sliced down the middle to make room for I-94. So it features the songs of the 40s and 50s of artists like Louis Jordan, like Nat King Cole, like Ruth Brown, Dinah Washington, and Mahalia Jackson, and other great artists. It was originally adapted from the Historical Society in 2010, and a presentation by the Historical Society in 2010, and it's been updated. Dan is the creator of the show, and did it and as a commission from the Minnesota Historical Society, with the input from the Rondo elders and performer colleagues who lived in Rondo. Where did the idea come from? What was the spark, Dan, that said, let's do this? How did it germinate in you?
Well, there were two things. One, there were at least two, but the two I'm thinking of are that I had done a show for the Historical Society about the Italian neighborhoods of the Twin Cities, both in St. Paul and Minneapolis, the year before, and they came back to me, and that was partly because I had traveled there and to Italy and just kind of learned Italian while I was over there. I had an interest in those communities, but as somebody who's lived in St. Paul all of my adult life, my post-college life and lived right on the edge, adjacent to Rondo. Um, I, I had bicycled through it. But I hadn't really taken the time to learn much about it. And when the Historical Society asked, would you like to focus on another neighborhood? I felt that it was time for me to learn about Rondo, and past time to learn about Rondo, because I think we can be surprisingly insulated from the stories of others if we don't take the time to go find them and to learn them and learn them as if they were our own, because in fact they are our own. We're all, as you say, the interconnectedness of all of us is undeniable, and to learn one another's stories is absolutely essential. And that's a lesson that I've kind of learned in the doing of this project, and in diving deeper into the stories of performer colleagues that I had known for some time but had never bothered to spend a whole lot of time talking to about the neighborhood and about the history of the neighborhood. And I'm thinking specifically of T. Mychael, of course, but also Yolanda Bruce, God bless her memory, who had a few generations of performers in the family growing up in that neighborhood, deep roots in that neighborhood. I'm thinking of Cynthia Johnson, who was also of the neighborhood, and Dorothea Burns, who spoke to me not only of her time at Hallie Q. Brown, but of her Uncle Gordon Parks. And so to have had the privilege of the conversations with a lot of those folks as this show came together back in 2010, 2011 was really a spark that has kept this project really alive for me over the ensuing years, as it has evolved and as it has brought in not only the performing but the writing talents of people like T. Mychael and Thomasina and Sharman, as we've kind of reshaped it over the past few years.
Dan, did I pronounce your name properly? Chouinard?
Chouinard. It's a French name, so you can pronounce it in the French way if you want, Chouinard. But around these in these parts, people say Chouinard.
So tell me about the name. What's your lineage? What's your story? Your family story?
French Canadian. There was a young couple who got married in the north of France in the late 1600s and came over to Quebec sometime around 1690, and from there on, it was Quebec until the 1800s, when treaties and the end of the Civil War opened up a whole lot of land opportunities and farming opportunities in Wisconsin, and from there to the Twin Cities.
You have Native Americans in your family. I'm wondering if the French Canadian. You look dark, but you've told me that your people are from Europe. They're French.
Yes, well, and that's my dad's side, and my mom's side is German, kind of Middle European. But yes, as is the case with a lot of French families from Quebec and from the early years, there is some Native American in the family, and that's another research project. There's that. There are family who were Catholic clergy who might have been working at boarding schools in North Dakota that served the Native population, served in quotes, the Native population there, and that's another area of inquiry that I'm looking forward to.
And Mychael, I've always wanted to ask you about your last name. I never have. I just keep forgetting, but now I got you. And I'm on the subject of legacy and lineage. Tell me about the Rambo name and where does that come from?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Al, I wish it was something really cool and nifty, but actually, I remember, I don't remember what grade, but I saw a movie with Sylvester. No, I'm just lying. It had nothing to do with my father's family is from a freedman town settled by formerly enslaved Africans that were on the Rambo, RHAMBEAUX, Rambo plantation in Tennessee.
And that
and
would
had
be
been
Rambo with a nice rolled
crumble,
R. That's right.
crumble. And when Colonel Gale freed those members of his lineage, because Lydia bore him 4 sons, and he had a fondness for her and them, and set them free before the Emancipation Proclamation, and they went into Texas. And because of that particular lineage, one of the 4 was very fair, as were 2 of them actually, and Lydia herself, as a matter of fact. And he had the chutzpah, the courage, the nerve, the audacity to go into the land bursar's office and purchase some land. And because, of course, they didn't question whether he was white or black, and they of course didn't think any enslaved person would have the nerve to come and do so. He purchased some land, and he went back, and there became the beginnings of a town that still exists in Cass County, Texas today, Rambo, Texas, which is now spelled, they dropped the H and the EAUX, and they bought a vowel like Wheel of Fortune, and they got the O, and we became Rambo well before the movie. And so I spent time throughout my years growing up going to Rambo primarily to bury family members in the Rambo Cemetery, which exists there as a humongous space where many a tombstone has the cameo painted of family members. So it's really quite remarkable to see people that I look like from 200 years ago, who I bear strong resemblance to, because their pictures are embossed or emblazoned on these tombstones. So there's that kind of lineage, and I often say to people, if you meet a black Rambo, we're probably related in some form or fashion. My grandfather had 16 brothers and sisters, and
wow.
then those before had numbers in that number as well.
How's it feel to walk around knowing there's a town named for you, or your name is the name of a town in Texas, and that your family was directly responsible for the creation? What kind of feelings does that give to you?
Well, aside from the people who walk behind me fanning my path and my steps, tossing rose petals before each step, I feel pretty normal for the most part. No, but in all earnest, it's pretty cool. I mean, I think I don't even think I know that I attribute much of where I have landed to having a story. I think that the sad and true reality of many of today's youth and many of our people who live in recovery or who live with substance addiction. I've been sober now 36 years, having moved to Minnesota 36 winters ago to get sober. My sobriety journey is part and parcel, if not mostly, as a result of having a map, having a story. And you talked in the introduction about stories and the significance of our stories. And, John Edgar Wideman said that the process for me is going to knit up the culture, the family, the collective family, all of us, is that we tell our stories and express our own values, and we say them in our own words, and we keep on telling them despite the chaos, despite the badness, and despite the pressure not to tell. And when we have stories about our families that give us a map, if we ever fall prey to getting lost, we use the map that we have learned through our ancestral knowledge or our personal familiar DNA to find our way back. And we can use that as a way to get to a space of wholeness. And many young people and many of our families don't have a map, and they don't have a sense of they don't even have a legend to know how many inches makes a mile, or how to get back to where they're coming from, where they want to be. And so I was very blessed to have those stories, those memories, those awarenesses of family members and loved ones who did great things and who are great people, and not for what they did materially, but just for who they were by virtue of being on this planet. And so that's my good fortune, and that's what it means for me to walk on that path and to walk in those shoes.
Dan, what's your relationship with the piano and with words?
Well, I'm thinking for a second here. The piano, it's a forever sort of relationship. I don't remember when I didn't play the piano. The piano that my mother grew up learning piano on in Milwaukee, so the story goes, was delivered to our driveway in Richfield, Minnesota, when I was maybe 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, and my brother Joe, 1 year older than me, and my younger brother Bill, we pretty much scrambled up onto the piano bench instantly and started pounding away. Um, and and my dad had played some piano as a kid and sang in barbershop quartets. My mom played a lot of piano all throughout her childhood. It's something that all of us kids did in the family. We all took piano lessons, all six of us, and most of us found our way into professions of music in one way or another. And my particular, in a big family, you have to kind of find your niche and protect it. And um, with all of us playing piano and choosing repertoire that spoke to us, I was often drawn to pop music, the stuff that I heard on the radio, and I would go to the piano and figure it out. And it was, back in the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, pop radio was a place of tremendous variety. And you could, I'm thinking about 50, 60 years ago, just this past summer in the 1960s, 64, it was the year of Beatlemania. But it was also, and the Beatles were at the top of the charts, and they dominated the top of the charts until Louis Armstrong comes along with Hello, Dolly. And he's the one who knocks them out of the #1 spot. And a few months later, or a few weeks later, the Beatles have Hard Day's Night that comes out, and it's Dean Martin who comes along and knocks them out of #1 with Everybody Loves Somebody Sometime. So this is the kind of radio I grew up with, was a tremendous variety. You'd turn it on and there'd be Led Zeppelin, followed by Roger Miller, followed by Louis Armstrong, followed by the Carpenters. So I was born and raised on a tremendous amount of variety, not only on radio but on records, and from what I heard my siblings exploring in terms of their own music, and so I learned to play by ear, and got pulled into dance bands and jazz bands, and when I moved to the Twin Cities, I started to get to know a much greater variety of performers than I had when I was growing up. And my growing up was in very white environments. It was Richfield. It was in a part of Richfield that I learned much later was pretty blanketed by racial restrictive covenants, racially restrictive housing covenants. And so it should have been no mystery to discover that my, all of my classes as a kid, all the kids in the neighborhood were kids that looked like me, and college was not much different. And it wasn't until the Twin Cities and kind of starting to get to know a broader and more diverse community that also my curiosity started around the history behind, not only behind the sort of segregation that I realize now I experienced as a kid, but also what was going on the radio, and why did certain things get on and others didn't, and why did we have certain records and not others. So it's been a this has been a place to explore a lot of things via the avenues for me, the kind of the first point of entry of music and piano.
If there hadn't been radio, and if you'd not been exposed to all the different sounds and genres of music on radio, you obviously were an avid listener and you paid a lot of attention. You remember the songs and the names and the times and this, but if there hadn't been radio, what would have been your relationship with the piano and with the sound of the piano, and therefore with music? How does music position you to assemble reality or the world? What does music do with you, for you, through you, that allows you to reflect an understanding that you can attribute to the music itself and to the piano in particular? And maybe nothing. I'm just raising the question.
No, this is interesting. Are you a piano player, by the way?
I am not.
Uh-huh.
I'm a writer. I'm a writer. I'm a writer.
Uh-huh. Well, it's just a really beautiful question, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to think about it. I would say that playing the piano is, for most people, when you start out, it's a very solitary thing. You need to devote a lot of solitary time to learning how to do this thing and how to get around, and what are the techniques that have been shown to be efficient and make sense. And you spend years learning that stuff, but you also spend years learning a canon of material, of European mostly material, but material of great beauty. And it's so you also learn that music has a power if you're open to it. And I was. It has a power to pull an emotional response, and 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 from that, I think I also learned that music has this power to infuse story with other layers of emotion and feeling. So it's hard to tease out. It's interesting. It's hard to tease out just precisely what is attributable to music or what is attributable to the piano, except that the piano, it has been such a universal instrument as well, so omnipresent. It's there in so much of the pop music, and of course, a lot of the pop music that I was most drawn to was Nat King Cole. I'm thinking about the family record collection now too. Nat King
Mhm.
Cole, Ray Charles, um, Billy Joel, the Carpenters, Elton John, Stevie Wonder. I was drawn to the task or the challenge of figuring out what it was that they were doing.
Mhm.
And partly, of course, it was to satisfy my own curiosity, and partly it was to impress my friends in junior high school. That I could play all these tunes, and not to be flippant about it, but that playing these tunes actually kind of drew us into a communal experience. Everybody started singing around the piano, and I kind
Mhm.
of got hooked on that vibe of music being something that you shared with people, even if I was kind of alone in the driver's seat of being the piano player. And by my college years, I had kind of moved that into a sort of a piano bar environment.
Mhm.
But what I value most to this day about the music I get to do is its power to bring people into a shared task, even if that task is listening to other people around you sing a song together. Um, I do a lot of community sing-alongs, and one of the first things I typically tell a crowd is, it's okay for you to be quiet if you feel like your singing is going to cause harm to the people around you. It's okay for you to be quiet and just listen, or for any reason whatsoever. It's okay for you to close your eyes and listen and let this music take you wherever it
Mhm.
takes you.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and just appreciate the fact that everybody else around you is doing the heavy lifting. Um, I love the communal possibilities.
T. Michael, what's your experience? I, I'm an avid audience member. I love being in audiences, and I love studying what I see in front of me, what's happening on the stage, either in a play or poetry reading, or a singer or a musician. And I come to the audience with an expectation, a desire to experience some kind of transformation, or at least knowledge that this is the process by which, and that reveals, the power, the transforming power of being together, uh, with music and with speech, with acting. Doesn't have to be speaking, but just with intent. And so I know that you've had a chance to study audiences and to interact and to read an audience. What are you reading when you're on stage? And maybe describe it when you're doing singing or when you're speaking. I've watched you MC, and man, you are simply phenomenal. I mean, just to watch you uh, moderate a program or open up some event and keep people through it is witnessing art itself. So what's on your mind when you're doing this, and how do you bring yourself to deliver? What do you seek to deliver in encounters like that?
Yeah. Well, Al, I think it's really fascinating that you refer to yourself as, I heard you say jest, and I think it's interesting because writers, people who are literary artists, whether they are the reader of or the constructor of, uh, require what every artist has to have, and what your question asks, and that is a capacity to be present, to be an active listener as you set up this interview and this time together, because if you really are prepared to take the temperature of the room, then you have the capacity to really recognize what you can bring to it. My grandfather, Marcus Milton Rambo, was a high school principal and a very learned and knowledgeable man. And he shared with me at a young age, while I was still in elementary school, how he said, "Boy, I want you to be something when you grow up. I want you to be something more than you ever imagined. And I want you to be something else, a thermostat." Because a thermometer takes the temperature, but a thermostat changes the atmosphere. Your journey in life is to step into spaces and recognize when you can change the atmosphere. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the gist of it is simply to say that as an MC and as an actor, as a vocalist, as a storyteller, as a community member, as a 42-year educator, being able to know when to be present and know what the room is saying to you, and then to be present and know when what your contributions are, have the capacity to change the atmosphere, is an innate skill set that comes either with how you were brought up into the world or how you landed in the world buck naked and barefoot. But it also can be learned by virtue of recognizing that some of the things that Western culture does not tell us, but indigenous culture does, is that leadership doesn't happen from being in the center of the circle. It happens from being a member of the circle. So when you inhabit a space and allow an audience to know that I'm not the center of your gaze, I am a part of your journey and your participation in the gaze, it's a really powerful thing. And I think that so often audience members perceive themselves as passive viewers, but in actuality, they're one of the most dynamic members of the cast, of the ensemble, because their energy is just what human beings are made predominantly of, energy and water, a sense of connectivity, of positive ions and things that connect us together and draw us toward and away from. And as a person who has sat in the seat where you do so often and so craftily and so professionally and so adeptly, that when people are actively listening, or when they're recognizing the energy draw that they have, they lean in. When they need a space to breathe or to reevaluate where they are in the space, they sit back. That sitting back could be, "Man, if you don't shut your face, I'm really through with you. You need to be quiet." Or it's like, "Whoa, wow, let me think about that. Damn, what was that?" Or it's like, "What? And then all those things that happen are what are so beautiful about the human being, is that it's all breathing. It's breath. We inhale, we exhale. We inhale, we exhale. And so the artist understands the capacity they have to join the rhythm of breath, or how to initiate someone else's capacity to breathe smoothly, shallow, with depth. And so I think that it's really very much a skill set of alchemy, knowing that when you bring certain things together, you can create other outcomes and other explosive responses, or the kind of result that you really hope to achieve. And that's what doing now what I love has done for me, recognizing that I walked into the world having this ability to do what I do. And thank goodness, my journeys of being unhoused and being actively an addict and having problems with, with judicial systems and things of that sort, that I landed in a place that gave me permission to go, you know what, I need to reevaluate what it is that I am, so that I can really bring forward what it is that I can give back. And so that's what I've been doing a lot of doing, just giving back what I was given.
That's amazing. You know, as you were speaking, the image that popped in my mind of an interview I did with Sun Ra.
Oh yeah.
And he had just performed over at the I think it was Children's Theater. Their place was a Halloween, as a matter of fact. And I came in a little late. He's up in the balcony, and my first time seeing him perform. But after the interview, you know, yeah, and I didn't know it was Halloween night, but the song that I walked in on was Halloween in Harlem.
Uh,
And it was amazing because it was breathtaking, and it took every person in the audience on a journey that was both unpredictable, but you know, and frightening, and fulfilling at the same time. It was just hard to believe what was happening, but it did. Afterwards, he said, I'm conscious of every person in the room. When one person enters and one person leaves, it changes everything. So my job as a musician is to be aware, completely aware, and be feeling, and to, I guess, draw in those feelings. And you said something, T. Mychael, that about breathing, and the image I got from listening to you was that part of the mission is to both recognize and then be able to harmonize the breathing. And the breathing is simply the act of living itself. And so through your presence, through your training, through your gift, bringing a harmonic vibration to an assembly of people, that kind of is the transformative moment that performance hopes to arrive at, and hopefully, you know, does achieve. It may not always, but that's kind of what the expectation that I have as I said, avid listener, avid audience member.
You know, I want to say, Al, that what you have opened up for me is recognizing and kind of teeing up and passing it back over to Dan, is that this capacity to do this is a part of what has made our journey on the 8th at Crooners so significant, is that Dan was able to take on the charge he was given in 2010-11 and recognize that if he were able to just allow himself to be poured into, allow himself to be vulnerable and open enough to listen with his eyes, his heart, his spirit, he was able to hear the voices of ancestors saying to him, I need to tell my story, which is how you started our program. And it was the excerpt I gave from John Edgar Wideman, that storytelling is the essence of all that we do as human beings. When we are unable to give a story, we cease to exist. When the enslaved Africans' voices were taken because their language was squashed and taken away, the story did not exist, and it took centuries for people who were enslaved to find their voices and to reclaim and to find new stories to tell. For Dan to recognize that this was a swath of story that had been absent or needed to be elevated and magnified is a gift. And to harness and to harvest the level of artistry and other participants to bring the story to life. Harlem, it's very much like Harlem in many ways. As I say this, but Rondo 56, it really says a lot about Dan as an artist, but the significance of this story and what we're talking about, breath. Because the breath, inside the breath, is where spirit exists and where spirit and art comes to life. And I think this story comes out of that kind of breath, and the music and the storytelling, and what Dan has done by enlisting others to pour into the same story that he was able to excavate that was already there. I think it's really wonderful, and I'm just happy to be able to be a part of this process on the 8th at 4 o'clock at Crooners to share that in that story. And I kind of summarized it in that way, because sadly I'm going to have to step away briefly, not briefly, but for the rest of the program. But I just wanted to be able to have a few closing words before I did, and offer Dan a space to take up from there.
Awesome. Well, I'm hanging on to every word that you say, and feeling every breath that you make. And I thank you, T. Mychael. I thank you so much for being who you are and for what you've done and what you said, what you shared today. So, brother, thank you so much. And
Thank
you know that you're always welcome here. You're one of my favorite people to talk to, and I could talk to you for hours, and I will. It will come.
But hook a brother up. Call me.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Dan, have a great rest of the day, everyone. And to all your listeners and viewers, thank you for being a part of this conversation today with Al McFarlane.
There you go. Thank
Thanks,
you,
T.
T.
Mychael.
Mychael.
Peace.
See you soon.
And Dan, you and I can keep hanging out if you're okay. Are you okay
I'd
time
love
wise,
that.
Dan?
I
Okay,
would love
great.
that.
Let me do this. Let me tell people that are listening or viewing. Some people will catch this. So we're streaming on 4 different platforms: the Insight News YouTube channel, the YouTube channel of Black Press USA, which is the National Newspaper Publishers Association. My newspaper is a part of that. We're streaming on 2 Facebook platforms, and we're streaming on a Twitter platform and on a LinkedIn platform. So people may be connecting from a variety of ways. We thank all the people who are connecting. I want to acknowledge Benjamin McKay, who's a native Minnesotan, who put a like on our Facebook, and also my friend LaSonia Jones, who I think is in Texas, who also did a like. So thank you, LaSonia, and always good to see your name. It brings your voice to mind and your wonderful spirit to mind as well. Thanks to Michelle Delicious Delight. She joins us almost every day as our #1 supporter and monitor. She monitors and keeps us on track, telling us when we're on, and gives us high fives when we come across a good story, good idea, a good point, and we appreciate that. And so one more thing I want to say is if you're listening now, and if you happen to be a Minnesota Twins baseball fan, this is a pivot, Dan. Insight News has some tickets, and we'd like to, if you're a baseball fan or enjoy the Twins Stadium, to offer those to a viewer anywhere here that wants to go. To get a ticket, you have to be a subscriber to our channel, our YouTube channel. So no matter which platform you're on right now or later, in the day, go to YouTube/Insight News MN and leave a comment. And your comment just has to put the word baseball in it. And we know that you're interested in getting baseball. You've become a subscriber. We will draw some winners, and you might win a pair or more of baseball tickets to a Minnesota Twins baseball game. I'm not particularly athletic, but I love the stadium. I love the Twins baseball stadium. I love the crowd. I love the feeling, the noise, the energy, and the focus that people bring to, supporting their team or the opposing team. I like being in that community as well. So, Dan, let me ask you to, going back to this Sunday's event, talk about the history of it. You started Rondo 56 in 2010. What were your expectations when you started? What were your discoveries as the show evolved over the several years now?
Well, there have been some changes in the roster of performers over the years, as you might expect.
Mm-hmm.
And on the first show, we had Mr. Bruce Henry, we had Cynthia Johnson, we had Mr. Eddie Ballard, who grew up in Rondo and who sang in a doo-wop group called the Velquins at St. Paul Central in the early 1950s, and he was gracious enough to join us on the show and tell some stories and sing. What did he sing? I think he sang "In the Still of the Night," and we also had a really solid harmonica player named George Faber, who was a Chicago kid, a white kid from Chicago, but he grew up listening to people like Howlin' Wolf and who all else? The guy who did Rocket 88. I'm not going to remember now, but the foundational stories and the framework of the thing have remained pretty solid, but we've kind of built others. We've filled in with other stories around them as the performing roster has changed, and most significantly, it changed when T. Mychael and Thomasina and Sharman all came on in the last 3 years. It was 3 years ago. And my invitation to them was not only to be part of this show, but to participate in the reimagining of the show, because I have to confess that I had the audacity back in 2010 to write the show the way I had written the Italian neighborhood show, which was to start out by saying, I didn't grow up Italian, I didn't grow up in these neighborhoods, but how fascinating it's been for me to learn these things. And let's go take a tour. And because part of this for the Historical Society was to promote the fact that they were digitizing millions of photographs that were suddenly available to everyone via their website, and they wanted people to know that they could see these photographs. And so the photographs of Rondo were one of the portals for me, as well as exploring the stories and exploring the place in person, on foot, on bicycle. But I had, as I was saying, the audacity to write the show with as the sole narrator. I was the one introducing the singers who would do songs, but then it would come back to the stories, and I was the guy at the piano standing up and moving to the mic every so often to tell a story, and that was my pattern for a lot of it. But it occurred to me after having done the show a few times that it really might be a richer, and it might be a more appropriate thing to have the storytelling role be shared, and for it ideally to be shared by people who had firsthand experience with the neighborhood. And that was T. Mychael at the time. In the early versions of the show, it was Yolanda and Cynthia, but those guys had gone on to do other things by that time. But to have Mrs. Dorothea Burns able to talk about her days leading the Hallie Q. Brown organization through the kind of the changes that came in the 1960s, to have Mr. Ballard talking about being in high school in the early 60s and singing that music, it just felt right to pass to share the role, and to acknowledge that these are these are stories that were important for everyone to have a voice in. But not to deny the importance, as we talk about the interrelatedness of stories. This is not to deny the importance of a white person's story of discovery, and of in some cases shocking discovery of things that you realize, why didn't I know this all my life?
For instance, what do you mean?
Well, I think about the racial covenants that covered so much of the area of cities across this country, especially as they grew into the suburbs and into the farmland. Developers, it was mostly developers, would place these racially restrictive covenants on the new developments, stating that the property could not be sold or leased or anything to anyone who was not of the Caucasian race, or wording to that effect. And these racial covenants, as I imagine, lots of folks know, they were hugely popular. They were widely used until the end of the 40s, when the Supreme Court outlawed them. They made them unenforceable, but they continued to sneak their way into housing deeds when properties were sold. They were used illegally until the 50s and 60s, when we finally got the Fair Housing Act in the mid 1960s. People who were buying and selling houses, like my parents in the 60s, they would not have known anything about this unless they had gone to the trouble of going back to all the previous versions of the
Mm.
abstract and the title to look for these things, because by then it was pretty deeply buried. And so this is not, it's not an exercise in in finding responsibility in particular. It's an exercise in acknowledging the importance, number one, of the work done by graduate students at the geography department at the University of Minnesota, who started
Mhm.
this organization called the Mapping Prejudice Project,
Mhm.
and who started a digitized map of all the covenants in the Twin Cities with the help of thousands of volunteers who would go online and examine old property deeds and flag the ones that had this language. And that was a tremendous project, and it was an amazing thing for me to learn about their work, for one, and then to learn that there were decades and decades worth of home buyers who probably had no idea. And yet, when I look around in my memory, when I look around at the neighborhoods I grew up in, I can see that we were all white
Mhm.
folks, and that in my junior high school of 1,000 people, there were two black girls. I
Mhm.
didn't, and of different grades. I didn't know either one of them. And that this legacy of segregation um, has a way of perpetuating itself in a within a fog of not knowing until something
Mhm.
clears it away.
Shakes it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And so, and the system and the process enable an individual to sort of blindly, uh, in a sense, unknowingly, continue down a path that sounds like it's reasonable and okay and unflawed, and it doesn't encourage anyone to examine structural flaws that really are anathema to the principles of freedom and democracy, fairness and equality. But those things existed, and so you are saying that that's the kind of thing that you came to discover, to learn about, and to see. So how does that discovery affect how you create, and how does it, number one, obviously you had the desire to experience and talk about Italian music, and that process led you to the opportunity to talk about music in the Black community, uh, and the discoveries that you're making. How do they show up, if they show up in your work?
Well, I guess I consider myself lucky to have to have been offered a platform by an organization like the Historical Society, and to have been given handed an invitation to create something which would be a vehicle to explore these things. And I think it so it shows up in the form, in the case of Rondo 56, it shows up in the form of a show that is a joyful uh, um, envisioning for me, because I wasn't there, but an envisioning of this community, this tight knit, vibrant, interconnected, and interdependent community, and uh, and how uh, and how that must have felt, and what that must have sounded like, and to have and to have access to the photographs and the oral histories that were collected by many, but so beautifully. In particular, I'm thinking of Kate Cavett, who pulled together a book back in the 90s called Voices of Rondo. Um, so I feel like I was lucky to be handed this assignment, this request, to pull together something that would create this community of an audience around a story. And it was a story that, I had to acknowledge at the top I wasn't a part of, but I think in learning one another's stories, we start to bring them in and kind of make them part of ourselves as well.
I think we've got your website pulled up, and we have you walk us through the website. Let's talk. And I want to make sure that we're inviting people to the event. And let me ask you to please make the invitation and walk us through what's on the website. Invite people to enjoy the website as well.
I'm happy to. And this is the Crooners website, by the way. And this is the page devoted to this Sunday's performance of Rondo 56, and it'll be at 4:00. And Crooners, as you might know, it's the old Shorewood Supper Club out in Fridley, but they have been one of the great champions of local music now for the past 10 years. And we're in their main room, which is a really comfy room for about 160 people. And packed onto the stage will be 9 of us. Is it 9? It'll be 8 of us. So the 4 of us that you see in the picture there, Thomasina, T. Mychael, Sharman, and myself. And then we've got Daryl Boudreau on percussion, Jay Young on bass, and a couple of horns, Scott Johnson and Walter Chancellor on saxophones. And it's I'd say it's an hour and 15-minute show that's got over 100 archival photos of Rondo in the 40s and 50s, Rondo people, Rondo organizations and clubs and places, some of them still existing, some of them not. And of course, a bunch of song lyrics so that we can sing a few tunes together throughout the course of the show. So you'll have an opportunity to be the drifters to T. Mychael's Benny King. We open the show with a Louis Jordan song about trains, and we go from trains to freeways by the end of the show.
Talk about the other artists. It was great to have T. Mychael on, but tell us about some of the other great artists. They're all friends of mine. I love them all, and they are stellar performers, artists, and stellar human beings. But let's lift them up a little bit. Talk about your experience working with Thomasina and the beauty that she brings wherever she is.
Yes, she is a bringer of beauty in so many ways. She came onto this show when we first brought it to St. Joan of Arc Church in South Minneapolis, where I was involved in, and still am involved to some degree, but since I was a kid. But for about 25 years, we did MLK or Black History Month shows at St. Joan of Arc. And one of them was this Rondo show, but we needed to turn it into a 2-hour show. And that's when I invited Thomasina on, because I knew she could bring the Billie Holiday, she could bring some Mahalia Jackson, and she could bring just her great, amazing, joyful spirit. Sharman and T. Mychael we invited onto that show as well for the first time, because we always had a moment focusing on some aspect of the civil rights movement and of Martin Luther King Jr. And T. Mychael helped with that on that show, as well as some Nat King Cole, as I recall. And Sharman is the most recent member of the bunch, and she grew up in the St. Joan of Arc neighborhood, and so she brought some really important personal experience to this story, and is also from a family that came up originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and so that's the experience of being a transplant and her of hearing her parents' stories. That's something that she's brought to the mix as well. Jay Young on bass, he's been on the show for one of our performances, a couple of performances before. I've just been an admirer of his from afar for a long time.
Everybody is. He's great.
Yeah, and Walter and Scott on saxophones. This is my first time working with those guys, and it's such a great classic old R&B sound to have a pair of saxophones on this stuff. So I feel really lucky.
Dan, we're out of time, but thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for inviting us to support you and to be together with you with the exciting Rondo 56 project. Check it out, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.